two really great experts that are with us tonight, Dr. Passi and also Dr. Brehm. They are two of the best from Nemours Hospital. Dr. Passi is a pediatric pulmonologist at Nemours in Delaware. She has worked very closely with children who face challenges with their breathing when exposed to triggers such as air pollution, humidity, and allergens. Dr. Passi trained at the T. Robert Wood Johnson Medical School in New Brunswick, completed her residency at Newark Beth Israel in Newark, and her pulmonary fellowship at Nemours Hospital in Delaware. We couldn't be more excited also about having Dr. Brehm with us. She is also the primary care pediatrician at Nemours in Philadelphia. With her personal experience as a parent to a child with asthma and someone living with asthma herself, she brings a unique perspective to her practice, considering environmental factors in respiratory health and in an active everyday life. Dr. Brehm trained at SUNY downstate and completed her pediatric residency at CHOP. I want to tell you really quickly about our partnership with Nemours. It's a very special place. We as a family, the Rouse family, experienced Nemours back in February of 2020, right before COVID hit. And we had a little girl who had some medical concerns, and we spent the majority of about 3 months at Nemours, and we were absolutely blown away by the incredible staff, the expertise, and the great care that our little girl received. We actually came all the way through the COVID time period, where we were seeing a lot of people getting very sick over the course of those months before school shut down. And it really was a key factor for us as we were really weighing whether we would even operate in the summer of 2020 or not. And it was really some of the great doctors at Nemours who really helped me understand what COVID was, and it was evolving as over the course of those weeks and months. And it really, became a key component for us to make a decision due to public health not to operate in the summer of 2020. So, I'm very grateful to Nemours and the great people there of so many things. But we rely on their expertise and their great wisdom when it comes to this partnership, and they've been tremendous in really helping educate us as summer experts, but also as parents. And so we hope tonight's webinar will add more wisdom to your life and to help you be the best parent that you can when it comes to your child's health. So with that said, we're going to start with Dr. Passi, who will go first tonight with the topic on air quality, how to track it and help your kids. We are all learning about what air quality really is based on these fires that are happening up north, and really how this climate change has really changed in so many ways. And so I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Passi. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me tonight. Going to try to just discuss some important topics that affect a lot of the children I see who have asthma, and even children who don't have many health problems, just to kind of go through what to do. So these are just some apps and resources to track air quality. They are they're very user-friendly. And so I just wanted to have this list out there for you to have, so that if you needed an easy way to look up some of the, things that might affect a little child's lungs, like air quality index, or some of these apps can even break down the pollutants by specificity. So these are just some good resources to go to. So this is just about air quality index. So how do we know what the air quality is? There's different ways to basically detect this. So one way is sometimes there are monitors that could be used that tell about specific pollutants, and they may use laser technology to just scan the particulate matter looks at the density of the pollutants in cubic meter of air. Others may use satellites to measure the energy reflected or emitted in a particular area to give you an idea of what the air quality is. And basically, when the air quality index is higher, that means there's a greater density of pollutants. And that then kind of correlates to some of the symptoms some people may experience. So we could go to the next slide. So just going through the scale, everybody knows kind of like the colors to look at, but just to break it down, so 50 or less is considered safe. The scale runs from 0 to 500. So 0 to 50 is safe. 51 to 100 is considered the yellow zone. It just means that there might be some particulate matter, but still safe. When the air quality is higher than 100, that's when it's considered unhealthy. So 100 to 150 is the orange zone. This zone might affect children who are very young or very old individuals. So you know, if you have like someone younger than a year, you may want to be more careful, or someone in the older age range, you might want to be more careful. The red zone is 151 to 200. So people with certain sensitivities, such as asthma, COPD, heart conditions, they may start to feel symptoms in this range. And we'll talk about what some of those symptoms are. The purple zone is considered unhealthy. This may affect children or adults who may not even have any health concerns. So this is where everyone should start taking precautions. It ranges from 201 to 300. And then the maroon zone is considered hazardous. And this is actually like a health warning is an effect when it's above 300. So some of the risks involved include, so when the air quality index is higher, children with asthma may experience some increased symptoms of like chest tightness or coughing. And we wonder, why are children sometimes at higher risk? And the reason is they spend more time outdoors. They also breathe more air per pound of body weight than adults. So they're just surface area wise being exposed to more of the pollutants. Also, their lungs are developing, and some of these children may have like BPD or, you know, problems with their lungs from prematurity. So they may be more susceptible to the effects of air pollution. And so again, if you're in the red zone or purple zone, you should really take into consideration some precautions. But honestly, any group of people, any population should definitely take precautions in the purple zone. So what are some of the symptoms? So children without any health issues, even they may have symptoms, and these symptoms may look like eye irritation, nose, throat, or upper airway irritation. So they may have some increased coughing, some increased mucus production, chest tightness, shortness of breath. These symptoms may worsen if they're like running around a lot. And, you know, when you run more, exercise more, your capacity or need for oxygen increases, so you're taking deeper breaths, again, having more exposure to those pollutants. Children who have asthma may develop wheezing, worsening shortness of breath, increased coughing, chest discomfort, even fatigue. So if you're noticing your child having increased work of breathing, or where they actually look like they're in distress, then we should talk about some of the precautions to take under those circumstances. Change the slide. Yeah, so here's some recommendations. So you always want to make sure the controller medication is on hand and up to date, especially when the air quality index is high. And the other ways to honestly to reduce exposure is having the child stay indoors or limiting time outside when the air quality index is higher. If you must go out, then you want to limit the exercise that's occurring outdoors. You want to keep it down to a minimum. Sometimes wearing a mask can help, but a regular mask may not actually filter some of those small particles that are seen in air pollution. So usually an N95 can be helpful, or a P100 respirator mask, if worn correctly, can be helpful to filter some of those particulate matters that may be present when the air quality index is higher. So some other tips. So it's always important to remember that although the greatest exposure is when you're outdoors, these particles can also be indoors. So we always have to make sure when the air quality index is higher to keep your windows closed. And then you also have to ensure that the air within your home is clean. And some of the way to do this is to get air cleaners or air purifiers. And these are like filters that can remove particles. They, you could consider getting a high efficiency mechanical filter or electronic air cleaner. Changing your filters periodically will be helpful. And you should avoid getting air cleaners that work by generating ozone, because that can just make the air quality not as clean in the house. Also, keep the windows closed, run the air conditioner, but always make sure that the air conditioner does not draw in air from outdoors and it has a filter. Avoid burning anything like wood fireplaces, gas logs, candles, and incense. Sometimes we forget that these things can also add to the particulate matter within the home, especially if there's a lot of, if there's a higher air quality index outdoors. And then always prevent dust accumulation, but you don't want to vacuum unless the vacuum has a HEPA filter. Otherwise, it may stir up the dust and make things a little worse.
Thanks, Dr. Passi. I learned so much.
Thank you, Dr. Passi. Just a couple questions before we move on to Dr. Brehm. Could you recommend any apps that you could suggest that parents could use on their phone that it kind of monitors that that zone that they're in?
So the first slide has the apps for that. And all of those apps are easy to get and easy to use on your phone. There's also a website. This is a little bit different from the air quality. It's called pollen.com, that if you type in your zip code, you can see what the pollen counts are right where you live. So those are important as well.
Great, thank you.
I'll also add, so this is something that I actually keep track of for my family because we have asthma, and the weather app for Apple, as an Apple user, they actually have air quality index in there as well.
Yeah. Also, Dr. Passi, you mentioned as a tip, keep your windows closed and run your AC. What would you say to families who actually have window units? Sometimes they'll have that in an attic, or they'll have that in their home. What do you recommend about that?
So if the air conditioner window unit has a filter, you should be okay. You just have to make sure it's not drawing. If it's drawing out air from outdoors, that it just has that filter within it, and that should be fine.
Great, thank you. Last but not least, I know that there's been a couple days this summer where we've been in the purple and the maroon zone at camp, and we've headed indoors once we've hit that level for our activities, which has been great to have plenty of facilities to be able to do that at our campsite. However, I'm seeing other camps that I drive by, or parks and recreational activities happening outside where really nobody's really cognizant of that happening with the air quality. What do you recommend for situations like that for people who aren't at a place like ESF that can't go inside but are outside doing activities, children in particular? What are those warning signs that a parent might see that night or the next day that they should be aware of if they did not get inside to, during that maroon zone or that health alert moment?
Well, you bring up a very important point, because the other thing to consider with air quality index is humidity. And it's important to know that if the humidity is high, the allergens and dust and mold increase. And that all kind of contributes to the air quality index. And what's important to recognize is heat and humidity can irritate the airways for a couple of reasons. Number one, if the child gets dehydrated because they're sweating and they're running around, they may develop increased signs of asthma or asthma symptoms like wheezing, shortness of breath, difficulty breathing. And a lot of children are triggered by humidity as well as high air quality index. So it's always important to make sure you have the child's albuterol, the most up-to-date inhaler. And then what's also important is not to keep the inhaler in a hot place, like in the car. You want to make sure it's in a cool, dark place. But yeah, that is the other thing, because humidity can cause irritation in the airways and can also contribute to bronchospasm. So anytime you see a child with any wheezing or increased work of breathing, those are the signs that are indicative of perhaps a child being triggered by either high air quality index or humidity.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Passi. Really appreciate it. We're going to move on to Dr. Brehm, who has a presentation on environmental health and safety about the sun, fun, and protection. Take it away, Dr. Brehm.
You mispronounce it. It's protection. I just can't help myself with a rhyme. So some of this I have a little bit that might just be a little bit duplicative of what Dr. Passi said as well, but starting with sun safety. So when I'm asked how long should my kids spend outside, I hate to say limit it, because you should be careful and you should use protection, but it's so fun to enjoy some of these summer activities, and I'd rather have us do it safely than limit a kid's time outside. The hours of the peak UV index are between about 10 and 4, with kind of maybe more like noon to 2 being like really, really high sun in the sky. And so those are going to be the times in which somebody is much, much more prone to a sunburn. So protecting your all of your body. So I find that ears are the place that I often forget the sunscreen myself. So a hat, especially a hat with a wide brim all the way around instead of like a baseball cap, can really help protect your ears, neck, and face. Sunglasses with UV protection. So not all the sunglasses that your children may want from Target or Five Below or whatever store that you may be going to may actually have sufficient UV protection. So it is something that's important to think about. And some amount of coverage of the skin can really be helpful in protecting the skin from the sun. And these are all things in addition to the sunscreen that we'll talk about on the next page. So people ask me, so I'm a primary care pediatrician. Part of my kind of spiel and talking about how to keep our kids healthy is talking about kind of seasonally appropriate things. So right now I'm talking a lot about sunscreen. And people ask me, what's the best sunscreen, Dr. Brehm? Well, the best sunscreen is the sunscreen your family's willing to wear. And so there's a few kind of general guidelines. I tend to prefer at least 30 SPF. There really is actually not much difference between 30 versus 45 versus 55 versus 70 in terms of what the actual effect on your body is. It has to do with some science magic, as I like to call it, that is done to talk about what the sun protection factor is, but you really actually don't get much benefit increasing beyond about 30. That said, between 15 and 30, I at least personally definitely notice a difference. So I tend to prefer at least 30. I also like mineral-based sunscreens better than the oxybenzone and avobenzone-based sunscreens, partly because I will say that I tend to have a little bit of a naturalness bias as a person. And there's been some studies that have shown that the avobenzone and oxybenzone can be a little bit of a concern as an endocrine disruptor. But also, they're gentler on your skin. The zinc oxide, titanium dioxide, mineral-based sunscreens are gentler to your skin. They're also reef safe, which I think is a bonus for our environment. So the other types of sunscreens can be bad for, if you're swimming and snorkeling, can be bad for the fish. But the downside, the major downside of the mineral-based sunscreen is that they can leave a pretty light cast to the skin. Now, if you can see, I don't have the fancy background because unfortunately my skin tone matches my white wall behind me pretty well. So white cast to the skin is not something that bothers my family very much, but it definitely is something that really can bother some patients. So the other types of sunscreens tend to be a little clearer on the skin. And then there are some specially formulated mineral-based sunscreens that have smaller particle size of the zinc and titanium products, so they leave less of a white cast. In terms of specific products, I will say I tend to buy the brand Baby Ganix, and we use it for my whole family, not just my little one, because it is the least expensive mineral-based sunscreen you can buy from Target. I've heard a lot of people really love the brand Blue Lizard. They have some mineral-based ones, but their particle size is small enough that they leave less of a light cast. And then I've had a number of patients really like the product Black Girl sunscreen, which is formulated for people with darker skin, so that it really is designed not to leave a white cast, because everybody should wear sunscreen. Some of the big foibles of sunscreen are that you need to use enough. So it's about 30 milliliters, which is a full ounce to cover an adult body. So depending on your kid's size, they may need that much, they may need half of it, but it's not just a tiny little schmear. It's a really good gooping. And the reason that sunscreen is not recommended for babies less than 6 months is just because they're so prone to sunscreen that shade's just a better skin protector for them. And so you can keep a baby in the shade. Another option other than sunscreen is sun protective clothing, so UPF clothing. Pretty much anything that covers your body is going to provide some sun protection, but some specifically designed clothing, and especially swimsuits for kids, can be an extra benefit. And in terms of when to reapply, really it depends on what you're doing. If you've got a little kid who's in and out of the pool, in and out of the pool, in and out of the pool, running around, getting toweled off, they may need to be reapplied a lot more often. So it needs to be reapplied at minimum every 2 hours and in sufficient quantities. And I will also say, as a personal note, the sunscreen is definitely for cloudy days. When I was a student athlete in high school and ran track, the worst sunburn I ever got was on a cloudy day, because I didn't think I needed to put sunscreen on. And so I woke up the next morning with blisters all over my nose and I had a 2nd-degree sunburn. So I cannot recommend that. So definitely sunscreen is for all of the days. These are sort of my preferred air quality kinds of things. This is from IQ Air, which is a website that I use. I like to use the Air Visual app, but we can go past this because Dr. Passi, I think, covered this beautifully. This is actually what yesterday was. And this, because I'm a really visual person, I like to look at things visually, but this is all just a summation of what she had already said. All right, so speaking about the weather, I'm sure everybody has heard about a bazillion times from a bazillion different people that it's not the heat, it's the humidity. And so this is the concept of the heat index. So my brother lives in Utah, and it is much easier to dry off. So you sweat and then your body dries off. Here you sweat and you stay sweaty. And so the heat index incorporates a measure of the humidity as well as the heat. And essentially, if the heat index is above 90, it's worth being a little extra cautious about outdoor fun. It doesn't mean you can't do some outdoor fun, but it means you may need to plan to take some breaks inside. You may need to plan to really bring a lot of water. People can lose a ton of liquid, and it's not just water, it's salt. So the number one electrolyte that gets lost in our sweat is sodium. So that needs to be replaced in order to have somebody feeling good and avoiding heat illness. So essentially, if the heat index is above 90 degrees, you need to take a little bit of extra caution and precaution, bring plenty of water, bring some sports drinks, plan to have maybe an escape. If you're at the beach, maybe midday, we go and get an ice cream and take a break out of the sun. But otherwise, you can run into some nasty risks with heat illnesses. So next slide. So this is fabulous advice that actually comes from the Nemours Kids Health website. So I love Nemours Kids Health. When my friends and family members are asking me advice for their kids, I often send them Kids Health articles, and hopefully they appreciate that. But I think that it's a very well written, easy to access website, and you don't have to be a Nemours patient to access it. And so this speaks about heat exhaustion. So heat exhaustion is the step before heat stroke. And hopefully somebody gets the relief that they need and doesn't develop heat stroke. But symptoms of heat exhaustion could include feeling thirsty, and that's the body asking for more liquid, feeling weak, feeling dizzy, sometimes fainting, muscle cramps, nausea, irritability, headaches, being super, super sweaty, or on the opposite side, having cool, clammy skin, and having a core body temperature that's high, but less than 104. Above 104, it's called heat stroke. And so what to do is to get cool. So what we want to do is we want to replace that water that somebody has sweated out. We want to replace that salt that somebody has sweated out, and we want to cool their body down. So bringing them to a cooler place, even the shade can be really, really helpful. Taking off excess clothing, getting them to drink water or something that has salt and sugar. So a sports drink or Pedialyte, even something like lemonade and maybe like a bag of pretzels can be really helpful. Your body holds on to water better if it comes with salt and sugar along with it. And so that oral rehydration with not just water, but water with some salt and some sugar too can be really, really helpful. Pedialyte is designed for kids, but the balance of it is not that different as to Gatorade. Gatorade has a bit more sugar in it, but if your option is Gatorade, get Gatorade. Get what your kid will drink also. Cooling down with evaporation, again, depends on how humid it is, can be really helpful. So a cool compress, putting some cool water on the skin is a good idea. One thing I definitely do not recommend, which is something that might be tempting, is that everybody in this land of COVID has their hand sanitizer and their alcohol wipes to clean off surfaces and things like that. That I never want to put on a kid's skin, because kids actually have a risk of absorbing alcohol from their skin. So then you add a second problem onto your kid who's already having a bad time. And then your friendly neighborhood pediatrician is always available. So our office at least always has a nurse triage line. Because if you're not able to get a kid starting to drink and starting to feel better, sometimes it's worth going to the hospital and starting to think about IV fluids. That said, most of the time kids can drink. It's not about chugging that whole Gatorade now. It's about taking a few sips, taking a few sips, taking a few sips. And honestly, it's about sometimes some preventative Gatorade and bringing that Pedialyte or that nice cool water bottle with you. I really like to carry around. I have I always tell people I was Girl Scout for way longer than it was cool, so I love to be prepared. But I carry around in my purse these little tablets. They're called Noon tablets, and there's many brands of this, but they're little basically they're like little flavored electrolyte pucks that you take that little hockey puck and you put it into your water bottle, and it adds some salt and some electrolyte and some flavor too. So I like to keep those with me so that I have them in case I need them, because I like to ride my bike and I like to be outside in the summertime, and I want to make sure that myself and my family are feeling good doing it. Next slide.
Great, Doctor. Thank you so much. Just a couple questions, Dr. Brehm, and then we were going to ask any of you who have questions to please ask them by just submitting it in the Q&A, and we'll be happy to answer them tonight with these great doctors. So Dr. Brehm, for someone who doesn't read labels probably enough when it comes to sunblock for themselves as also for their kids, what is really the difference to tell between what's a mineral and versus oxy in terms of the difference? There's some blocks out there that it's almost like white paint you're putting on, right? And it's thick and it's you can tell it's gonna block everything. But I've also seen some sunblock that it's completely clear, and these are 30 plus SPFs. Could you just tell us a little bit more about, if you don't have your glasses, to find out what's those, what's in there?
Totally.
What's a good way, a tip for us parents?
Usually it says it loud and proud on the label,
Okay.
but I will also say that usually the clearer ones they're not the mineral-based ones. The mineral-based ones do tend to be thick and, as you said, paint-like. And so for some people, they find that texture and consistency fine, and some people really don't. Like I said, the sunscreen your family will wear is the best sunscreen. So don't sweat it too much. If you have a brand of sunscreen that you really like, if you grew up on the Coppertone and you got a big bottle of that and it's working great for you, great, awesome. But generally they say mineral based on them pretty prominently.
Great. Thank you. And in terms of drinking water, on the topic of hydration, what's the appropriate amount of water to properly hydrate? I know I've read in the past, it's like take your actual weight and divide that in half, and it just, that's put that in ounces. So if you're 100 pounds, it's, really 50 ounces that you should be drinking. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's going to depend on what you're doing, and it's going to depend on how hot it is. So honestly, we've got a really good thirst receptor in our bodies. It's our tongues and our brains. And so if you're thirsty, you should drink. Aiming to have, so like when we go on a hike, we aim to have like a long hike, you want to have at least a gallon a person a day. But it really is going to depend on how hot it is and what you're doing. So if you're, we went hiking last weekend and I was carrying my 30-pound toddler in a 10-pound hiking backpack, and it was pretty hot outside. And so, drink to thirst. So I want somebody to, if they're thirsty, have an opportunity to drink. And I think a general goal of aiming to have your kid go through a couple water bottles a day at minimum, more if it's hot and they're really running around. But if they're thirsty, I want them to drink.
Great, thank you. I know at camp at ESF, we are doing on specific days when it reaches a certain temperature, we're doing what we call red flag days. So we have drink logs and we're keeping track of how many times an hour are our campers drinking, which is every 20 minutes. And we try to make that, we're trying to do that cadence throughout the course of the day. When campers get home, what would you recommend, after a day of activities, whether it be at camp or at sports? And what's really the difference? Is it a fad or a fact that like coconut water versus water versus, what would you recommend when it comes to that rehydration to really get those, get feeling better?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a really good question. And especially with some of these products that are really trendy right now, I laugh because all of my patients are drinking Prime. And I'm sure all of your campers are drinking Prime. And Prime has two lines of things. There's one that's an energy drink and one that's a sports drink. The coconut water, I actually love a coconut water on a hot day. I find it very refreshing, but coconut water has a lot more potassium and magnesium rather than sodium. And sodium is the main electrolyte you lose in sweat. So as opposed to like the Gatorades or the Powerades or Pedialyte even have a lot more sodium in them. I think that whatever your kid is going to drink is fine. We're not in an area where, so like, for instance, if your kid has an afternoon snack and that afternoon snack is, let's aim something for something, that gets all of these important electrolytes. So we've got our big glass of water, and then we've got maybe some cubes of watermelon, which has our sugar, and it also has actually a decent amount of potassium in it. And maybe, again, we eat a lot of pretzels in my house, and we're from Philly, so pretzels have a little bit of salt on them too. So then you're getting actually all of those things together. So salt is something that is a little bit easier to get in the diet that we currently have, but it is one of the main things that needs to be replaced from sweating. But it doesn't have to be replaced by drinking. It could be replaced by eating too. So aiming to have some snacks that have a little bit of salt in them, and especially on a hot day, can be great. We also get a lot of our liquid from our food. So especially if your kid, like mine, likes to eat a ton of fruit in the summertime, that fruit has a ton of liquid in it. And that fruit may be something also that helps keep us hydrated too. That's why I say drink to thirst. Make sure the water is available. Try to get them sipping often. My aim is to be hydrated enough that the pee is lemonade color, and that kids are making bare minimum at least 3 peas a day. Some kids are kind of camels and hold it a little longer, but if we're starting to get pee that's darker, we need to drink more. If we've got a kid who's thirsty, we need to drink more. And we want to make sure that we're offering some things with some salt. Salt gets a bad rep, but salt is a necessary electrolyte to make our bodies work. But some things with salt along with the water too.
Great. Thank you, Doctor. So we're going to go to some questions that our audience is submitting. First question is for both of you. COVID, it's still here. What do you recommend? What are you seeing, and should we be worried?
I think in terms of just, I think that COVID should basically be treated just like any other viral illness. So lots of hand washing. If your child isn't feeling well, has a fever, keep them home. And just the same precautions you would take for any other viral illness, you should just take for COVID.
Great.
I absolutely agree. I will also say that anecdotally, while I have certainly seen some kids get very sick from COVID, more of the kids that I take care of have had sort of like, it's a normal run-of-the-mill virus kind of experiences with COVID. It's still here. You can certainly have kids who get super sick afterwards, super sick during, but we also shouldn't be sending kids to school with fevers anyway. We want to keep all the other viruses away from our kids too.
Absolutely. So this next question is for Dr. Brehm. Any tips for making sure your child is properly sunscreened when they insist on applying it?
Oh man, if you tell me the answer to this one, I'll give you $1 million. It's hard. So there are certain products available that, like, there are sunscreens that come in different colors that when you rub them in fully, they turn clear or turn white. Again, this is white. The sunscreen that your kid will wear is the best sunscreen. So when I was a kid, there was one that was like a copper tone that was purple that then, faded in. I've seen one that's blue that looks kind of like aloe gel that then when you rub it in, it's clear. But really aiming for sufficient quantity. So making sure that they're blobbing enough in their hand and then making sure there's no mist spots. That's the classic with a little kid. Or sometimes some other family members that of mine that I won't name. But you get that like big patch in the middle of their back. So making sure that that there's no mist spots. They do have sunscreen sticks. We like those for a face or for a touch up kind of now and then. I actually, again, this is like speaking to the contents of my purse. I carry around a sunscreen stick actually at all times, just in case I'm like, oh, actually we're spending more time out here than I thought. So I think that can sometimes be helpful to like quickly swipe on the appropriate areas. Part of the reason I like the zinc oxide is because it kind of doesn't come off as easily. And so then you kind of just like wind up with like shellacked on layers of sunscreen in, I think, a beneficial way. But making sure they're using enough, making sure they're not missing a spot, sometimes getting some products that make it a little easier to not miss spots or to, make it kind of fun.
Great, thank you, Doctor.
Oh, I'm not a fan of sunscreen sprays. I actually should say that. I think sunscreen sprays, you can really miss a lot of spots very easily. So you can use the sunscreen spray, but you need to rub it in. And you also tend to use less with the sunscreen spray than you actually need. So not a huge fan of those, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. Dr. Passi, should we be worried about when we're inside on some of these, unhealthy air quality days, but our dogs or cats are outside? Should we be worried?
Yes, actually, their lungs are a lot like our lungs. I would say when the air quality index is high, they should also be indoors. And the same thing goes with heat and humidity because they don't sweat, as many of you may know, they don't sweat. So they're getting rid of their heat mainly through panting. And that is one of the signs to look for. If they're panting a lot, you have to make sure they have enough water and they are indoors, and also just with the air quality index that they're indoors and it's higher.
Great, thank you. Dr. Passi, also another question from one of our audience members. What were some of the questions you got when we were impacted by the wildfire smoke? Does that have different health risks than the air quality particles we usually get in this region?
I think the most dangerous part of that was because it happened during a time of year when it is very hot, the heat itself can trap dust and pollution more efficiently than when the air is drier and colder. So it was kind of like a double whammy during those times. And I did see a lot more patients needing their albuterol, needing to be indoors a little bit more so that they weren't as exposed to the particulate matter.
Thank you. Also, how would you both suggest if you see a child, who's having an asthma attack during a period where the child's never had asthma before, what are some of those symptoms or signs with what's happening, and then what do you do in that moment?
So sometimes what a child may experience is chest tightness, and difficulty breathing because the airways are irritated. And the airways may be irritated just because, if it's hot out and then there's a lot of particulate matter that may be irritating, they're taking deeper, faster breaths and they're more exposed to that air that's polluted. And so they may develop a cough, because that's one of our body's biggest mechanisms to protect ourselves from air that may have a little bit more dust or particulate matter in it. So a lot of these children present with cough and chest tightness, and they will actually feel some chest pain. They may also say it's harder to get a breath in. And sometimes the way I equate this is like how you feel when you're like in an indoor swimming pool, like the chlorine kind of gets irritating. That's kind of how it feels. And what to do? Well, I would definitely recommend calling the pediatrician. Sometimes just getting them out of that environment is enough if they don't have underlying asthma. If they do have underlying asthma, though, I would say to give their albuterol and monitor them closely.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Dr. Brehm, we've got two for you. These are
Mhm.
good ones. Is some type of suntan or sunburn okay for my child to get? And if so, how much?
Yeah, good question. So we aim to ideally have nobody get a sunburn ever, but sometimes it happens. Sometimes you do the best sunscreening you can, and a sunburn happens. Or sometimes you forget one morning or something. So the risk of skin cancer really markedly goes up the more blistering sunburns you have. So the more you have a sunburn that peels. So those are really the biggest to try to avoid. But a little bit here and there is not the end of the world. It's the risk of skin cancer definitely goes up the more kind of sun exposure you get. So there's these the two kinds of sun rays, the UVA and the UVB. Both are blocked by sunscreen. The UVA is A for aging. So the UVA is what gives you those fine lines and wrinkles on your face, but the UVB is what gives you burns. So A for aging, B for burns. Ideally, we're managing the risk of sunburns. We do want to get some sun exposure because actually that's how we make our vitamin D. And vitamin D is a really important nutrient for our bone growth and for our immune systems. But ideally we're trying to prevent those peeling sunburns. The idea of a base tan, so people talk about getting a base tan. That's actually a myth. Base tans are not a thing. They don't help protect you from the sun. But a little bit of occasional sun exposure actually is a good thing too, in that you can make some vitamin D. So the aim, trying to prevent enough sun exposure so that you don't get these blistering sunburns, you avoid the misery associated with it, and you avoid the skin cancer risk. But a little bit of sun is good for making vitamin D.
And then the follow-up question from this parent was, if my child has received sun that evening, what is the best thing to do to apply to their face or to their body?
Great question. Yeah. So post sunburn care. honestly, another coat of that mineral-based sunscreen, zinc oxide sunscreen. So zinc oxide is the same chemical that is in diaper cream. It's very soothing to the skin. So another coat of sunscreen actually can be great. Like, it's pretty moisturizing. That the zinc oxide can be pretty protective to the skin. So if you're on vacation and you've got nothing else, just put more sunscreen on. A lot of people swear by aloe. I think the cooling gels can be helpful. Ibuprofen to really cut down that inflammation, if that could be what's uncomfortable, and just generally trying to keep the skin relatively well moisturized while it's healing can be helpful too. I would avoid anything with alcohols in it. You're going to know if it has alcohol if it stings. So generally that's things in a pump bottle. Things in a pump bottle tend to have alcohols in them, but more sunscreen, aloe, ibuprofen.
That's fantastic. I never knew that. I just learned something, that you could reapply sunscreen that night, because of that it does the same effect. That's great. Thank you.
It's especially more if you do buy the mineral-based products, because those chemicals in it can have some soothing effects of the skin too.
Great. Well, we are coming to the conclusion of tonight's webinar. We want to thank both Dr. Passi and Dr. Brehm for your wisdom and your tips. Nemours has a wonderful website to go to for tips like this, about anything, and it's the kidshealth.org site. You will find that as something to be incredibly the go-to place for all this great knowledge and research and recommendations. Again, kidshealth.org is Nemours' website, and the place to be, place to go. We will be sending this webinar to all our families who participated tonight, as well as those who plan to view this at a later date. We will have it also hosted on our website at esfcamps.com, and you'll see it on the next version of our Insider magazine. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Passi, Dr. Brehm, and all of you for tuning in tonight. We greatly appreciate it. And for additional resources, feel free to go to the nemours.org site, the kids.org site, kidshealth.org site, and esfcamps.com. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you at camp.